Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I show you how I use this Dollar Tree sign to make a rustic farmhouse winter display. So get comfortable and let's start crafting. I start by completely disassembling the sign, taking off the roof trim, the wreath, and all of the paper. Here's what it looks like after taking all of that paper off. You can see what a mess it makes. I've drawn in where I want the new roof line to be, and that's where I will cut with an X-Acto knife or razor blade to give me the shape I want. I take some of the trim from the original piece and glue it to the roof. I also had to cut some of my own pieces to fit this new shape. And then I just give it a base coat of white using Waverly chalk paint, and I gave it 2 or 3 coats. I take a little wood plaque that I got from Walmart. I believe they also sell them at Dollar Tree. And I'm just going to cut that to fit as a nice little side shed to the barn. So I'm just giving it an angled roof. I use some large craft stick scraps that I have to add walls to this piece. So I'm just gluing them to the wood piece that I cut out. And this makes it much easier to cut the craft sticks once they're glued to something. At least in my opinion, it's easier to cut them, especially if we're cutting them vertically. And because the craft sticks have some imperfections, some of them are a little warped or they're just not completely even, that actually works great for this project because I want some cracks to kind of seep through to make it look like an aged barn. And here you can see I'm just figuring out, based on how the craft sticks look, how I want them. I ended up rearranging some of the sticks based on the imperfections and how I wanted them to lay on the board. Using an X-Acto knife, I trim all of the craft sticks so that they fit the shape of the shed. I trimmed the rounded edges off of some small craft sticks to make some wood panels for my barn doors. I used wood glue to glue the craft sticks together to make my panels. I used the barn red paint from Apple Barrel and I just watered it down a little bit so it gives me somewhat of a sheer finish. And I just paint the door panels as well as all of the walls using that color. I want this to have a rustic distressed look, so I didn't want full-on color. That's why I watered it down. I also sanded all of the wall pieces to distress the edges and give the barn a more worn look. Here are some of the wall pieces. And that's just using a large craft stick, again from Walmart. I used this lantern from the Dollar Tree to make the barn door. As you can see from the front of that, it is the perfect design to make a barn door. So I just disassembled this lantern. I'm not going to show you how I use that cutting blade because I don't always use the safest practices when cutting wood. But once you get that top off, it's pretty easy to disassemble the rest of the lantern. And I can use the other pieces for other craft projects. So I just want to cut the notches off the top and bottom of that lantern. I did buy 2 lanterns so that I could get 2 of these front pieces, and just cutting off those little nubs on the top and bottom. I give each of those panels a couple of coats of Waverly white chalk paint, and I'm making sure to get all of the sides as well. Glue the painted side of those door panels that I made from the small craft sticks to the back side of the door. You can see that I've already glued down some of the wall panels to the front of the barn, so I'm just going to continue with that. And that white piece of trim toward the upper portion of the barn, I trimmed from a jumbo craft stick and painted it white just to give some separation. So I'm just going to finish gluing my panels to the piece and making any adjustments needed based on the imperfections of those craft sticks and how I want some of the cracks to show through. Like I mentioned earlier, it is much easier to trim the craft sticks, especially when you're trimming lengthwise or vertically, once they're glued to a piece. So I glue that last wall panel to the right, knowing that it hangs over, and I'll trim that once the glue is dried. Here's what the barn looks like after all of my wall panels are glued in. And now I'm just going to go in with some brown chalk pastel, and I'm just going to do some shading along the roof as well as all of the walls and trim, just to give it that aged, distressed look. I also do some distressing on the front side of my wall panels just to make it all blend in and look rustic. I bought this little wood truck from Walmart, but it was kind of disproportionate in shape, so I did trim off along that top roof line and fender just to make it look a little more proportional. It's one of those tabletop signs from the Dollar Tree for my stand. That's what I'll use to glue everything in place. So I disassembled that wood truck, just taking off the fenders, and of course it did do some damage. Sometimes they come apart easy, sometimes they don't. So in this case, they didn't. So you'll see me paint this side of the truck, but I end up flipping it over and making this the back, covering it with some scrapbook paper that you'll see in a bit. And I ended up using the other side as my front side. But I'm just going to give the entire truck a couple of coats of white Waverly chalk paint. I bought these little wood rounds from Hobby Lobby. They sell them in a pack, and they are the perfect size for some hubcaps on my truck. So I'm just giving them a coat of Elephant Waverly chalk paint. I use that same paint to paint the front and back bumper, as well as a sideboard along the bottom side of the truck. I used Granite Gray from Apple Barrel Paints to paint the headlight. Here I just used some masking tape to mark off the area where I want to paint the sideboard. And I'm just going in with my Elephant Gray paint and painting that in. The masking tape just gives me a nice straight edge along the top. I also used that lighter gray color to go over the hubcaps just to lighten them up a little bit. I thought they were a little too dark using the elephant. I used some chalk pastels to do my shading and highlighting. So going in with that light gray color, I'm just going to do some shading along the fenders, the outline of the truck, and areas that I think need it. I do use white chalk pastel to highlight the hubcaps and tires. I use the chalk to mark out where the door will be. Here you can see after the shading, I do also use the chalk to make a doorknob, and I'm just going to go in with some detailing using an ultrafine Sharpie to do some lines and squiggles and little dots just to go around the outline of the truck and give it more detail and make it stand out. The squiggles and dots are a little trick I picked up in the 80s when it was very popular, and I just think it adds a lot to a project. I also use the Sharpie to define the truck door handle. You can already see what a difference that's making for the truck to stand out. I've added some scrapbook paper to the back of the truck just to camouflage those imperfections from when I took the fenders off. And I just go ahead and trim all along the outside of the truck. That gives the back of the piece a nice finished look. I would have painted it had there not been any damage, but in this case, I just covered it with scrap paper. No one will ever see the back of the truck, but I do like to finish off the pieces and make sure they are painted front, back, and sides. If you're enjoying this video, please let YouTube know by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. I found these trees at Hobby Lobby a couple years ago after a clearance sale, and the tip of the one tree was broken off, so I just molded a new shape using some air dry clay, and you would never be able to tell that this piece was broken. I'm just going to paint the entire piece using ink from Waverly Chalk Paint. I want some black to show through when I add some green paint a little bit later. I want some of the black to come through, giving it some highlights, lowlights. So I add 3 different colors to the trees. And I also don't like all of that glitter. So this is covering all of that up as well as giving the tree some depth. Here's what it looks like after a base coat of black paint. Some of that glitter is still showing through, but I do add some other colors, so you'll never be able to see that. I am using Americana paint in the color Evergreen. I also use Holly Branch from Apple Barrel Paints to add some highlights. So I'm just going in with a paintbrush and just lightly pouncing, making sure I don't cover the entire tree so some of that black comes through. You could also use a paper towel or a sponge. I just happen to be using a paintbrush. And I'm just going to go over the entire tree. I don't show on camera my using the holly branch lighter green, but I do the same technique, just kind of lightly pouncing the paintbrush over it to give the tree some depth and dimension. I'm going to add some snow to my trees using some puffy paint. I'm just squeezing some on there, and then I use a paintbrush to move that paint around to get the shapes that I want. And I do go over it with a couple of coats of the puffy paint. I will be posting some Valentine's crochet and craft projects this week, including my all-time favorite Valentine craft so far. It is so adorable. I won't say much about it, but I have never seen anything like it anywhere, and I can't wait to share it with you. So please make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. Here's what the barn looks like after adding some embellishments, using some of those tree branches that they sell from Dollar Tree, adding some berries to it and a ribbon. I add some tumbling tower blocks to the back to use for stability when I glue it onto that tabletop sign. I used air-dried clay to make some snowdrifts, and you can see how badly it cracked after a couple of days of drying. Rather than just throw it out or call it quits, I decided to salvage what I could by just gluing those pieces onto the tabletop sign, and then I used caulk to go in and fill in those cracks, and you'll never be able to see that it is cracked at all. Here I am just squeezing that caulk on, and I'm getting into all of those cracks and filling it in, and I use a paintbrush just to push that caulk in the areas that I need it. I mixed some baking soda with chalk paint to make a nice thick consistency, kind of like a concrete shake. And I just go over all of the air dried clay, filling in all of those cracks and making it look like realistic snow. Here's what it looks like after doing all of the caulk and the paint to fill in those cracks. I think it turned out pretty nice. You can't tell at all that the clay underneath is cracked. And I did cover the entire base of those trees just to make them fit in with the snowdrifts. And there are the spaces that I have left open so that I can glue the additional pieces on. I take a fine grit sanding block and I'm just smoothing out some of the rough edges that were made from the baking soda and the paint. I added a bottle brush tree to the truck, and you can see where I've covered it with scrapbook paper and added a tumbling tower block to give it stability when I glue it down to the tabletop sign. I've trimmed some birch branches that I have, and I'm just going to make a little log pile outside of the barn. This is definitely a piece that you can put out and enjoy all winter season. Winters in the upper Midwest are very long, so I get a lot of mileage out of winter decor. But let me know in the comments if you like to decorate for winter, or do you just pack everything up after Christmas so you don't have to see it again until next year. Here's what the back looks like, completely finished. Here's what the front looks like. Let's take a closer look at the finished project. I really love the detail of that Sharpie marker on the truck. I think it really makes it stand out nicely. And you can get a closer look at some of that distressing on the walls and trim. This project did take some time thanks to cutting all of those wall boards as well as the air dry clay cracking on me, but I think it came together very nicely. I hope you enjoyed this project and it gave you some ideas to make your own winter display.